It was just past 3 in the morning when Dr. Alan Carter's computer made a sound he had never heard before. He sat up from his uncomfortable office chair where he had fallen asleep. His neck hurt and his eyes were dry, but the strange alert from his equipment made him instantly awake. Alan worked at the Small Sky Observatory just outside of Phoenix. For 15 years, he had pointed radio telescopes at the stars, hoping to hear anything that wasn't just random space noise. Most of his colleagues had given up on the search for alien signals years ago. They moved on to studying black holes or galaxy formation, things that actually got funding. But Alan stayed, working nights when the equipment wasn't being used for real science. Now his patience had paid off. The computer screen showed wave patterns that couldn't possibly be natural. They repeated exactly every 108.7 seconds. The pattern was complex, but clearly organized in a way that only intelligence could create. "Holy shit," Alan whispered to the empty room. His hands shook as he checked the signal again. It was still there. He ran 3 different tests to make sure it wasn't coming from Earth, a satellite or some military experiment. Each test confirmed the same thing. The signal came from deep space, specifically from a star system about 40 light years away. Alan reached for his phone and called the only person he trusted with this information. "Lisa? It's Alan. I know it's late, but you need to get to the observatory right now." Dr. Lisa Morris arrived 40 minutes later. She was still wearing pajama pants under her winter coat, her curly hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She had been Alan's classmate in graduate school before going to work for NASA. "This better be good, Alan," she said, dropping her bag on the floor. Alan didn't speak. He just pointed at the screen. Lisa leaned in close, her eyes moving across the data. Her annoyed expression changed to surprise, then to wonder. Is this what I think it is?" Alan nodded. "It's a signal. Not random. Not from Earth. I've checked everything 3 times. Lisa sat down and began typing rapidly. "Have you decoded any of it?" "Some," Alan said. "That's why I called you. Look at this part here." He pointed to a section of the signal that repeated more frequently than the rest. "I think it's mathematics. Universal constants. Like they're trying to establish a translation key." Lisa worked through the night. By morning, she had connected her NASA algorithms to Alan's computer. The programs were designed to look for patterns in data, to find meaning in noise. By noon, they had their first breakthrough. "It's a distress call," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alan looked at the partial translation on the screen. "You're sure? The mathematics is clear? They're using universal physical constants to build a language bridge, but the pattern of repetition and intensity matches what we would use for an emergency broadcast. They're asking for help." Over the next 24 hours, more of the message became clear. The signal contained coordinates, technical specifications for engines capable of faster-than-light travel, and biological information about the senders. "They call themselves the Alosians," Lisa explained, as government officials began to fill the small observatory. "They're under attack by something they call the Swarm. From what I can tell, the Alosians sent this message in all directions, hoping any advanced civilization might answer." Alan noticed men in military uniforms studying the star charts. "What are they doing?" he asked quietly. "Figuring out how to get there," Lisa replied. "The president authorized a response mission this morning." "We can't get there," Alan said. "We don't have that technology." Lisa pointed to a section of decoded data. "Yes, we do. The Alosians included specifications for FTL drives in their message. NASA engineers think we can build them based on these designs." 2 days later, Alan and Lisa found themselves in a secured military facility beneath the Rocky Mountains. They sat at a long table with military leaders, government officials, and scientists from various fields. At the head of the table, Admiral Peter Rogers spoke in a steady, commanding voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to embark on humanity's first interstellar rescue mission. Operation Samaritan will demonstrate to whoever is out there that Earth responds to those in need." A scientist Alan didn't recognize raised his hand. "Admiral, there's something concerning in the biological data the aliens sent. According to their environmental specifications, they consider Earth an extreme death world." "Meaning what, exactly?" the Admiral asked. "Meaning they evolved in conditions very different from ours. Lower gravity, less radiation, fewer atmospheric toxins, and less biological competition. To them, we're terrifying. We're stronger, faster, and more durable than they ever evolved to be. Our normal atmospheric gases would be poisonous to them." The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. "Are you suggesting we shouldn't help them?" a woman in a suit asked. "Not at all," the scientist replied. "I'm suggesting they have no idea who they've asked for help. They sent out a universal call, probably expecting someone similar to themselves to answer. Instead, they got us, creatures they would consider monsters based on their biological understanding." Admiral Rogers nodded slowly. "Then we'll just have to show them that sometimes it takes a monster to fight a monster." The meeting continued with discussions of ship designs, weapon systems, and crew selection. Alan found himself appointed as the mission's chief communications specialist, while Lisa would lead the team working to further decode the Elosian language. As the meeting ended, Alan pulled Lisa aside. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Lisa looked through the window at the massive construction area, where ships were already being built using the alien specifications. "Someone out there is asking for help," she said. "They're scared and dying. What would it say about humanity if we just ignored them?" Alan watched as workers assembled what would become Earth's first interstellar fleet. 6 ships designed for both scientific exploration and combat. The lead vessel had already been named, U.E.'s Pathfinder. "We have no idea what we're getting into," Alan said. Lisa smiled. "That's what makes it an adventure. Besides, from what we can tell about these Elosians, they've never met anyone like us before. Imagine their surprise when the creatures they consider Deathworlders show up to save them." Alan thought about the signal still streaming from 40 light-years away. A cry for help that had reached the wrong species. Or perhaps exactly the right one. "Let's just hope we get there in time," he said. The next 3 months passed in a blur of activity. What normally would have taken years of planning and building was compressed into weeks. The alien specifications from the Elosian distress signal made it possible to create technology humans had only dreamed about. Scientists and engineers worked day and night, fueled by the knowledge that somewhere in space, an entire species waited for rescue. Captain Frank Wells stood on the bridge of the U.E.S. Pathfinder and watched the final preparations through the main viewport. At 52, Frank had spent 30 years in the Navy before being selected to command humanity's first interstellar mission. His weathered face and gray hair gave him an appearance of wisdom, but inside he felt like a child about to step into the unknown. "Captain, the last of the crew has boarded," said his first officer. Commander Natalie Kim. Frank nodded. "And the other ships?" "UE Sentinel, Vanguard, Dauntless, Horizon, and Guardian are all at 98% readiness. We'll be able to depart on schedule." Frank turned away from the viewport to look at the bridge of his ship. It was unlike any naval vessel he had ever commanded. The controls were a mix of familiar human design and strange new technology based on the Elosian specifications. 6 ships, each with a crew of 150, would soon travel faster than light to answer a distress call from beings no human had ever seen. "Sir," Commander Kim said, interrupting his thoughts, "Lieutenant Rodriguez is here with her latest report." Lieutenant Samantha Rodriguez was the fleet's top xenolinguistics specialist. She had been working with Dr. Lisa Morris to decipher more of the Elosian language from the continuing transmissions. "Lieutenant," Frank greeted her, "what have you learned?" Samantha held up her tablet. "We've translated more details about the attackers, sir. The Elosians call them the Swarm. They appear to be some kind of collective species that consumes resources from planets and moons. The Elosians describe them as relentless and numberless." Frank frowned. "Any information about their technology?" "Their weapons? Some, sir. Their ships are described as organic and self-healing. The Elosians' weapons seem ineffective against them." She paused. "There's something else. The Elosians mentioned what they call classification categories for life-bearing planets. Earth falls into a category they call Extreme Deathworld." "So I've heard," Frank said. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means, sir, that by their standards, we shouldn't exist. Our gravity is too strong, our atmosphere too toxic, our radiation levels too high, and our ecosystem too competitive for intelligent life to evolve. According to their understanding of biology, humans are, well, nearly impossible." Frank considered this information. "Are you saying they didn't expect us to answer their call?" "I don't think they even knew we existed, sir. Their distress signal was sent in all directions, hoping for any response. But from what we can tell, they expected help from species more like themselves." In the engineering bay of the Pathfinder, Chief Engineer Kevin Powell supervised the final calibrations of the new FTL drive. The engine room hummed with power as technicians made adjustments to equipment that just months ago had been theoretical. "Be gentle with that coupling," Kevin called to a young technician. "It's generating enough energy to power all of North America. One wrong move and will be a very pretty explosion." His assistant, Olivia Wright, approached with a tablet showing diagnostic readings. "The drive is stable, Chief. All 6 ships are showing green across the board." Kevin wiped sweat from his forehead. "It's amazing, isn't it? 3 months ago, we were decades away from this technology. Then some aliens send us the instruction manual because they're in trouble, and suddenly we're about to travel faster than light." Olivia nodded. "The specs they sent are brilliant. It's like they handed us the keys to the stars." "Makes you wonder why they'd share something this valuable," Kevin said. "Maybe they were desperate," Olivia suggested. "Or maybe interstellar travel isn't as big a deal to them as it is to us." In the military briefing room, Colonel Richard Hayes addressed the security teams from all 6 ships. The room was filled with men and women who had been selected from special forces units around the world. "We have no idea what we're going to find when we reach the Elosian system," Richard said, his voice firm. "We're going in with defensive and humanitarian objectives. But make no mistake if these swarm creatures are as dangerous as the Elosians. Claim we need to be prepared for combat." A Marine raised her hand. "Sir, how do we fight an enemy we've never seen?" "The same way humans have always adapted to new threats," Richard replied. "We observe, we learn, and we use what we know about ourselves. According to the data, we may have physical advantages. Earth's gravity is stronger than most habitable worlds. That means we're likely stronger and more durable than both the Elosians and possibly the Swarm." On the morning of launch, thousands gathered to watch the departure of the fleet. The 6 ships hovered above the New Mexico desert. There, massive forms gleaming in the sunlight. They didn't look like traditional spacecraft. There were no rockets or thrusters. Instead, they were sleek, almost predatory in design. With smooth hulls that reflected the light dot in the White House, the president addressed the world on live television. "Today, humanity takes its first steps into the wider galaxy. We go not as conquerors, but as helpers answering a call of distress. We do not know what we will find among the stars, but we carry with us the best of what it means to be human, our courage, our compassion, and our determination to stand against injustice wherever we find it. Aboard the Pathfinder, Captain Frank. Wells gave the order. All ships prepare for FTL jump. The bridge crew worked at their stations, activating the alien technology that would bend space around them. Coordinates locked, Commander Kim reported. FTL drives at full power. Frank took a deep breath. Somewhere, 40 light years away, a civilization was fighting for survival. They had no idea that 6 ships full of Deathworlders were about to arrive. Begin jump sequence, he ordered. Outside, observers gasped as rings of blue energy formed around each ship. The rings spun faster and grew brighter until they were too brilliant to look at directly. Then, in 6 flashes of light, the ships vanished. Humanity's first interstellar fleet was on its way to answer an alien SOS, a signal that had reached the wrong species. Or perhaps exactly the right one. The 3 weeks spent in FTL travel felt both endless and brief. Inside the 6 ships, crews trained, studied the Elosion data, and prepared for every possible scenario they could imagine. But nothing could truly prepare them for what they would find. Captain Frank Wells was on the bridge of the Pathfinder when the ship dropped out of FTL. The view screen showed a scene of devastation that made the bridge fall silent. The Elosion home system had once contained 9 planets. Now there were only 5, and 2 of those were broken into large chunks of rock. Debris fields filled the space where planets should have been. "My God," whispered Commander Kim. Frank's voice remained steady despite the horror before him. "Status of the fleet?" "All ships present and accounted for, Captain," reported the tactical officer. "No damage from the jump." "Scan for life signs," Frank ordered, "and keep our shields at maximum. Whatever did this might still be here." The fleet moved deeper into the system, sensors sweeping for any sign of the Elosians or their attackers. Communications Officer Michelle Diaz suddenly straightened at her station. "Captain, I'm picking up signals from the 3rd moon of the 4th planet. Very weak, but definitely artificial. Can you translate?" Michelle adjusted her controls. "It matches patterns in the Elosian distress call. I think they're still alive down there." Frank made his decision quickly. "Commander Kim, prepare a landing party. I'll lead it myself." "Sir?" Commander Kim protested. "Protocol states that the captain should—" "I know the protocol," Frank interrupted. "But this is first contact with an alien species. I need to be there." The landing team assembled in the shuttle bay. Captain Wells, Lieutenant Rodriguez for translations, Medical Officer Dr. Eric Johnson, and a squad of Marines led by Sergeant Susan Miller. They wore environmental suits designed based on the Elosian biological data. The air they breathed would be toxic to the aliens, so the suits included special filters. The shuttle landed on the moon's rocky surface. Through the viewport, they could see structures half buried in the ground buildings that looked like they were made from some kind of crystal. "The structures appear to be shelters," Rodriguez said, studying her scanner. "I'm detecting movement inside the largest one." They exited the shuttle, moving carefully in the moon's low gravity. Sergeant Miller positioned her Marines in a protective formation as they approached the crystal structure. A section of it slid open, revealing an entrance. "They're inviting us in," Rodriguez said. Inside, the air was thinner and had a strange, sweet smell. The walls glowed with a soft blue light. And then they saw the Elosians. The aliens were unlike anything the humans had imagined. They stood about 4 feet tall and had bodies that seemed to be made of semi-transparent crystal. Inside their clear forms, colored lights moved like liquid through complex networks of channels. They had no faces as humans would recognize, but the front of their bodies contained clusters of small, gem-like structures that might have been sensory organs. When the lead Elosian saw the humans, the lights inside its body flashed rapidly in patterns of blue and yellow. Rodriguez checked her. Translation device. It's saying something like, "You cannot be natural beings. Your density, your strength, ... The toxins you exhale, ... impossible." Dr. Johnson quickly confirmed that human respiration produced carbon dioxide that was toxic to Elosian biology. The landing party adjusted their suit filters to prevent any leakage. Frank stepped forward slowly. "Tell them we received their distress call, and we've come to help." Rodriguez spoke into her device, which converted her words into patterns of light that it projected toward the Elosians. The aliens' internal lights flashed rapidly in response. "There?" "Confused," Rodriguez translated. "They say the message was not meant for predator species. They say the swarm is similar to us." "But worse," Frank frowned. "Ask them to explain." The lead Elosian's lights pulsed in complex patterns. Rodriguez listened to her device, her expression growing concerned. "Captain, they're saying that Earth was classified in their database as uninhabitable by sentient life. They never expected a species like us to receive their message. They thought only beings similar to themselves would respond." "And the swarm?" Frank asked. "The swarm is a species that evolved on what they consider a partial death world, stronger and more aggressive than the Elosians. But ... double quotes, she paused. Apparently still not as physically robust as humans." Before they could learn more, Sergeant Miller's radio crackled with an urgent message from the fleet. "Captain," came Commander Kim's voice, "sensors are detecting multiple ships entering the system. They match the description of swarm vessels from the Elosian data." "How many?" Frank asked. "At least 50, sir. They're heading toward the moon." The Elosian's lights flashed frantically when Rodriguez translated this news. "They're saying we need to leave," Rodriguez reported. "They think we've doomed ourselves by coming here." Frank shook his head. "We didn't come all this way to run. Tell them we're going to help them fight." The Elosian's lights dimmed to almost nothing, which Rodriguez interpreted as shock or disbelief. "They don't understand why we would risk ourselves for them," she said. Frank looked at the fragile crystalline being. "Because that's what humans do. We help those who need it." As they prepared to return to the shuttle, Dr. Johnson approached. "One of the Elosians." Through Rodriguez, he asked for any information about swarm biology that might help them fight more effectively. The Elosian's response came through Rodriguez's translator. "They are like your species in some ways. They evolved on a world with higher gravity than ours, but lower than yours. They have hard outer shells and communicate through chemical signals. They consume crystalline life forms like us for the energy stored in our structures." Back aboard the Pathfinder, Frank quickly briefed his officers on what they had learned. The fleet was forming a defensive position around the moon, where the surviving Elosians had taken shelter. "The swarm outnumbers us," Frank said, "but we have advantages they don't expect. They've never encountered humans before. They don't know what we're capable of." On the tactical display, the swarm ships approached in a tight formation. They were organic-looking vessels with shapes that reminded Frank of insects. "All ships, prepare for combat," Frank ordered. "Remember your training, but be ready to adapt. We're about to fight an enemy unlike any humanity has faced before." As the first swarm ships came within weapons range, Frank felt a strange calm settle over him. Humanity's first interstellar battle was about to begin. They were fighting for a species that had never expected them to exist, against an enemy that had never faced the determination of human beings. "For Earth," Frank said, quietly, "and for the Elosians." The space around the moon lit up as the human fleet opened fire. The first shots fired by the human fleet tore through 3 swarm ships before the alien vessels could react. Captain Frank Wells watched from the bridge of the Pathfinder as the space around them lit up with weapons fire. "They didn't expect us to fire first," Commander Kim observed. "They've never faced humans before," Frank replied. "Keep pressing the attack. Don't give them time to adapt." The 6 human ships moved with surprising speed and agility. On board the UES Sentinel, Commander Lavra Anderson coordinated the fleets. "Defensive formation. They're fast," she reported to Frank over the comm, "but their patterns are predictable. It's like they've never faced an enemy that can outthink them." The swarm ships, numbering over 50, tried to surround the human vessels. Their organic-looking craft fired beams of green energy that splashed against the human shields. "Shields holding at 82%, reported the tactical officer on the Pathfinder. Frank studied the enemy movements on his display. "Using a hive attack pattern. They expect us to break formation and run." Instead of retreating, Frank ordered the fleet to tighten their formation around the moon where the Elosians sheltered. The human ships turned their strongest shields toward the incoming fire while returning deadly accurate shots of their own dot in the engine room of the Pathfinder. Chief Engineer Kevin Powell monitored the power systems as the ship shook from enemy. "Fire. Divert more power to the forward shields," he ordered his team. "And keep those weapons hot." Kevin noticed something strange on his sensors. "Captain," he called over the comm, "I'm picking up some kind of chemical signature being released." "By the swarm ships. Can you identify it?" Frank asked. "It's not in our database, sir. But the pattern suggests it might be a form of communication. They're releasing these chemicals into space in specific patterns." Frank relayed this information to Lieutenant Rodriguez, who was still studying the Elosian data on swarm behavior. "The Elosians mentioned this," she confirmed. "The swarm communicates through chemical signals, like pheromones, but they can project them through vacuum somehow. It's how they coordinate their attacks." This information gave Frank an idea. He contacted Science Officer John Garcia on the UES Horizon. "John, is there any way we could disrupt these chemical signals?" There was a pause as the science officer considered the question. "Possibly, sir. If we could create a counter-agent and deploy it via missile, we might be able to interfere with their coordination." "Make it happen," Frank ordered. While the scientists worked, the battle continued to rage. The human fleet was holding its own, but they were still outnumbered. Every swarm ship they destroyed was replaced by another. "On the moon's surface, Sergeant." Susan Miller and her squad of Marines faced a ground assault as swarm landing craft touched down near the Elosian shelter. The Marines took defensive positions around the crystal structure. The first swarm warriors emerged from their landing craft, and the humans got their first look at the enemy. They were insectoid beings, standing 7 feet tall on 6 legs, with hard exoskeletons that gleamed like polished black metal. Their heads featured multiple eyes and clicking mandibles. "Hold fire until they're in range," Sergeant Miller ordered her squad. The swarm warriors advanced in perfect formation, carrying weapons that looked like they were grown rather than built. When they reached the perimeter, Miller gave the order to fire. The Marines' standard-issue rifles cracked in the thin atmosphere of the moon. The high-velocity rounds punched through the swarm exoskeletons with surprising ease. The alien warriors faltered, clearly not expecting such devastating firepower. Miller reported back to the fleet. "Captain, our weapons are highly effective against their ground forces. Their exoskeletons provide less protection than expected." "That makes sense," Frank replied. "They evolved for lightweight efficiency rather than to withstand high-velocity impacts. Keep holding the perimeter." In space, the battle took a turn when Science Officer Garcia completed his counter-agent. Missiles loaded with the chemical compound were launched toward the center of the swarm fleet. The effect was immediate and dramatic. As the compound dispersed, The perfect coordination of the swarm ships began to falter. Some ships stopped moving entirely, while others began firing in random directions. "It's working!" Commander Kim exclaimed. "They can't communicate with each other." Frank seized the opportunity. "All ships, focus fire on their command vessel." The human fleet concentrated their attack on the largest swarm ship at the center of the formation. Without the chemical coordination, the other swarm vessels couldn't come to its defense effectively. After a barrage of weapons fire, the command ship exploded in a burst of green energy dot. What happened next surprised everyone. Instead of continuing to fight, many of the swarm ships began to retreat. Some crashed into each other, while others simply fled the system. "They're running," Commander Kim said, disbelief in her voice. "We've won." Frank was more cautious. "Maintain battle stations. This might be a trick." Lieutenant Rodriguez consulted with the Elosians via comlink. Their lights flashed rapidly as they communicated. "The Elosians are stunned," Rodriguez reported. "They say the swarm never retreats. In thousands of years of conflict, they've never seen the swarm abandon a battle." On the moon's surface, the remaining swarm warriors were also in disarray. Without direction from their command ship, they milled around aimlessly or attacked each other. Sergeant Miller's squad easily pushed them back to their landing craft. Some fled, while others simply stopped moving, as if waiting for orders that would never come. After an hour with no new swarm attacks, Frank finally allowed himself to believe they had won. He ordered damage reports from all ships. Despite the intensity of the battle, the human fleet had suffered only minor damage. Not a single crew member had been lost. Frank contacted the Elosian leaders. Through Rodriguez's translation, he asked, "Why did they retreat? We expected them to fight to the end." The Elosians' lights pulsed slowly. Rodriguez translated, "They have never experienced defeat before. They have no protocol for it. When you destroyed their command ship and disrupted their communication, their collective consciousness fragmented. They no longer function as a single entity." Frank looked out at the stars visible from the bridge viewport. Humanity's first interstellar battle had ended in victory, but he knew this was just the beginning. "Contact Earth," he ordered Communications Officer Michelle Diaz. "Tell them we've engaged the swarm and forced them to retreat. The Elosians are safe for now, but this isn't over." As the message was sent, Frank turned to Commander Kim. "Now comes the hard part." "Sir?" she asked. "Diplomacy," Frank said with a small smile. "We just announced our presence to the galaxy in a way no one could ignore. Now we need to figure out what that means for humanity." In the crystal shelters, the Elosians' internal lights glowed with colors the translators identified as hope, an emotion they had not expressed in a very long time. 1 month after the Battle of Elosian Moon, representatives from 27 spacefaring civilizations gathered on a neutral space station at the edge of what humans now knew was called the Galactic Council's territory. The massive ring-shaped station rotated slowly, creating artificial gravity that was comfortable for most species, but felt uncomfortably light to the humans. Captain Frank Wells led the Earth delegation, which included Lieutenant Rodriguez, Dr. Alan Carter, and Diplomatic Officer Grace Bennett. They sat at a large circular table, surrounded by aliens of all shapes and sizes. Some looked almost human, while others were so different that Frank struggled to understand how they could even be alive. The Elosian ambassador, a crystalline being whose internal lights glowed with blues and purples, sat next to the human delegation. Its presence was a statement of alliance that made many of the other representatives uncomfortable. The meeting was called to order by the Arcturian delegate, a gaseous being contained within an environmental suit that looked like a floating silver sphere. Its voice came through translators as flat and emotionless. "This emergency summit has been called to address the unexpected appearance of a new spacefaring species and their intervention in the Elosian swarm conflict, the Arcturian stated. We will first hear from the humans. Grace Bennett stood to address the assembly. She was a career diplomat in her 40s, with dark skin and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her voice was clear and confident as she spoke. Thank you for welcoming us to this gathering. We are honored to join the galactic community. We come in peace and friendship, seeking only to build relationships based on mutual respect and cooperation. A delegate from a species called the Volter interrupted. The Volter looked like a tall, thin humanoid with green skin and large, leaf-like ears. Your species should not exist, the Volter said bluntly. No intelligent life can evolve on a death world with your gravity, radiation, and atmospheric composition. It defies all evolutionary models. Frank noticed how many of the delegates nodded in agreement. They were afraid, he realized, not just of what humans had done to the swarm, but of the very fact that humans existed at all. Grace responded calmly. Yet here we are. Perhaps your models need updating. Lieutenant Rodriguez stood next and carefully explained humanity's history. With each detail, humans could survive radiation doses lethal to most species, could heal from injuries that would be fatal to others, could process foods toxic to galactic standards. The assembled delegates grew more disturbed. We did not. No, we were unusual, Rodriguez concluded. Earth is the only home we have ever known. What you call a death world, we call home. The Elosian ambassador's lights pulsed in patterns that Rodriguez's translator interpreted as a request to speak. The crystalline being moved to the center of the chamber, its body catching the light and sending rainbow reflections across the walls. The humans fight with the ferocity of the swarm, but temper it with mercy and reason, the Elosian's translator conveyed. When our distress call reached Earth, they could have ignored it. Instead, they built a fleet and traveled across space to help a species they had never met. They are not conquerors. They answered a call for help. A delegate from the Herax Confederation, a species of six-limbed mammals, leaned forward. But what are your intentions now, humans? Your technology is clearly advanced enough for interstellar travel and warfare. What will you do with it? Frank stood to answer this question. We want what most species want, to explore, to learn, to grow. We have no interest in conquest. We prove that by helping the Elosians without asking for anything in return. But you must understand our concern, said the Arcturian delegate. Your physical capabilities alone make your kind dangerous. A single human could kill many members of most council species with bare hands. And now you have advanced technology as, well, Dr. Alan Carter, the astronomer who had first detected the Elosian signal, stepped forward. Despite being visibly nervous, his voice was steady. When I first received the Elosian signal, I had no idea it would lead to this moment. I was just a scientist doing my job. But what happened next says everything about who we are as a species. We heard a cry for help from across the stars, and our first instinct wasn't to ignore it or exploit it. It was to help. That's the humanity we bring to this galaxy. The chamber fell silent as the delegates considered his words. Finally, the Arcturian spoke again. The council must discuss this matter privately. Please wait outside. The human delegation and the Elosian ambassador were escorted to a waiting area. For nearly 6 hours, they waited while the council deliberated. Frank paced the room, while Rodriguez continued to learn more of the Elosian language directly from the ambassador. When they were finally called back, the mood in the chamber had changed. The Arcturian delegate addressed them formally. The council has reached a decision, while many of us remain concerned about the implications of a death world species joining galactic society. We cannot ignore your actions in defense of the Elosians. Therefore, we extend conditional recognition to humanity as a spacefaring civilization. Grace Bennett bowed slightly. "We thank you for this recognition. There is more," the Arcturian continued. "We have received reports of swarm activity in 3 new sectors. They appear to be regrouping. The Council has voted to establish an interspecies defense initiative, and we invite Earth to participate." Frank exchanged glances with his team. This was unexpected, but made perfect sense. The Council feared humans, but they feared the swarm more. Where would this initiative be headquartered? Frank asked. "On Earth," the Arcturian replied. "Your world's conditions would make it impossible for the swarm to launch a direct attack, and your species has already proven effective against them." And so it was decided. As the human fleet prepared to escort diplomatic vessels back to Earth, Frank stood on the bridge of the Pathfinder and looked out at the stars. Humanity had taken its first steps into a much larger universe. They had announced their presence not through conquest, but through protection. The galaxy might fear the Deathworlders, but they were beginning to understand the value of having such terrifying allies. Back on Earth, construction began on facilities to host representatives from dozens of alien species. Schools added xenobiology and interstellar politics to their curricula. And in shipyards around the world, new vessels took shape faster, stronger, and more numerous. The alien SOS had indeed reached the wrong species. The Deathworlder fleet was mobilizing. But now they mobilized not just for Earth, but for all those who needed protection in a dangerous galaxy. As Dr. Alan Carter had said at the Council, that was the humanity they were bringing to the stars.